Hi, welcome to this week's video as we paint this engaging yet powerful front-facing portrait of Vincent here. Dark skin tones are some of the most vibrant and rewarding really to paint, but achieving that depth and radiance starts with a strong foundation. As you can see here, as we commence this portrait with the underlying drawing, I've chosen a somewhat high chroma yellow to accentuate the final look of this portrait. In today's video, we're diving into the art of underpainting. And I call it art because there's so many different ways that you can apply it. This, in fact, will be video one of two. Next week's video will also deal with underpainting, but it will be much more elaborate. We'll do a multi-layer approach to underpainting where a lot of it will permeate through the final piece. It actually is already completed. I just have to do final editing. For this particular video, however, I'll show you how to build structure, explore temperature contrast, and use a thoughtful color palette to set the stage for the painting and how rich it looks and lifelike it looks. If you are new to my channel, my name is Dorn and I've been teaching and painting professionally for around 25 years or so. If I sound hoarse, it's because I'm sick again. This is the second time in a little over a month or so. I guess that's the reality of having school-age kids that come home with a whole lot of cooties. But I've committed to this YouTube thing and more so uploading weekly, really, because I see great progress in not only the information that I'm putting out, but in my work as well. I guess the process of painting, filming myself painting, is giving me these side effects which I never really thought would be there. Just you see a different perspective of your own work, and I see great potential in it. If you are familiar with some of my content here, uh, you were aware that some of the earlier portraits that I did are somewhat stylized. They are very expressive, not only with the drawing, the design, but also the color choices. For this particular portrait, I wanted to sort of focus on the dark skin tones and how to apply them. And as thus, I've chosen to paint it much more realistically. As you'll see as we paint along, the application method is very similar to what we've already covered on my channel, how I apply paint. But the color mixing and the colors that I apply for his skin in particularly are much more lifelike. So now with regards to firstly the underpainting, which as I said is, and you can see here, is quite high chroma yellow. The reason I've chosen this particular color is that my intent was for it to create this luminous glow. I know that for this particular subject and the way that his skin is and ended up looking at the end, yellow reflects a lot of the light. So by me starting with this vibrant yellow underpainting, I wanted the painting to appear brighter and more luminous overall, even after all the layering. And you'll see as I put paint down, as I'm layering these darker values in the shadow, which some of them are muted, some of them are somewhat higher chroma, the yellow sort of permeates through everywhere and it gives this glow. Yellow interacts vibrantly with all the complementary values of color of the blues and purples that will subsequently be placed in the shadow of his face, but also with the final color that I will apply on top of the background. As you can see in that small image on the right, which is a finished piece, that top coat is somewhat cool. It has a bit of warmth to it added, but this contrast can make shadows and that cool area more dynamic without looking overly dull. So this approach to complementary color underpainting, cool color overpainting is not new. It's been done really throughout the centuries. Here I'm accentuating it that much more by having that yellow show through to the final painting because, well, for me it looks more dynamic. It enhances this sitters, enhances skin tones. Now for this portrait, I've chosen this yellow. For your own work, if you were to choose this approach to underpainting, overpainting combination, you don't necessarily have to use it. I've just chosen it because it enhances what I'm trying to sort of communicate here. But you can choose any warm color to sort of put down that will balance the coolness of the top painting. This is the same approach that I do for landscape work, really, for cityscape work, for still lifes, which I don't do as much anymore, but virtually for all portrait work. Now, the rendering part of the portrait, which in this case will be quite extensive, can have that yellow show through in my case, or whatever other warm hue you choose to put down, virtually everywhere, or you can cover it as much as you want. In this particular case, the high chroma yellow forces you to think about layering strategically. And I don't know, you can't really tell as I paint this. This is a 1 day's painting session condensed down to 18 minutes, but you really need to work with, in my case, translucent and opaque paints. So there's a lot of impasto paints that are applied on his face, and you'll see that in a minute, but there are also translucent and thin paint applications that again intensify that yellow and let that yellow shine through. So the impact encourages more deliberate choices in color mixing, placement, and it often results in fresher, more dynamic results. Now, if this is your first video of mine that you're watching, the tool that I'm using here is a squeegee brush. I used the larger guy a few minutes ago for his hair, which I've chosen to again do very little rendering to, but this particular squeegee is a 1/2 inch, 1/8 inch, has two sides with which you can apply paint. And as you've seen in my previous videos, it basically allows me to get crisp notes of color wherever it is that I use it without having any mud or having to have to wash my brushes if brushes is what I was using. I use it a lot, virtually on all of my portrait work, but I do use brushes as well. But this is an invaluable tool. This guy, I've found out, well, there's been a lot of questions on this. He's made by a company called Princeton out of New Jersey. So just check your art supply stores. You can find them there. Some people have said they've found them at Jerry's Artorama, I believe, in the States. Here in Canada, I can't seem to find mine anymore. I mean, I've had mine for forever. So as I said, my previous videos go more into depth with regards to how I apply paint and my color palette. This video is more concerned about the tonal relationships between the underpainting and the overpainting, and of course, painting dark skin. With our model here, I've laid down a lot of the shadow colors of his neck already. We have a cool light coming in from both sides, really, of his face, making those colors on his cheeks quite cool. Blues, purples, violets are dominant there, as well as in parts of his neck. But there's a warm light that's sort of illuminating the front of his face. So as you can see there, I'm mixing color on the palette that are very similar to how I would mix any skin tone color, really. If you've watched some of my videos previously, and you'll see in a moment, there is no skin color that's specific. Now, I mean, it's funny, I've seen these things at art stores where they sell tubes of skin color, and I never really understand what that is supposed to mean. But as you can tell, it's the color palette that I use is virtually identical to how I would sort of apply color to a lighter skin individual, or even much more darker skin individual. So fundamentally, it really comes down to what color value you are seeing on your model or your reference photo, and putting that color down on your substrate. As you can see there, I'm mixing all sorts of different warms for his glowing skin in the front, yellow ochre, cadmium reds, cadmium oranges, mixed with slight amount of white, and that creates a certain radiant glow. And now what you don't see here, and you may see in a second, but you don't really see it, is that I layer with this tool that I talked about earlier, in a sense that some of the initial hues of color that I put down are really heavy with burnt umber, raw sienna, and maybe even burnt sienna, which gives this sort of foundation that lays on top of the underpainting, which is yellow, on top of which I built this sort of the warm top color of his face. Now for the cools of his beard and his neck, I mean, where the light is somewhat diffused, really. I mean, he's got the cool light coming in from the side, but his neck is quite warm. You know, you can focus on using things like ultramarine blue mixed with dioxazine purple, or maybe a bit of iridium green mixed with earth tone, for example. Now I'm showing you this side view just so you get an idea as to both how I apply these notes of color, but how they look and how they interact to create this lifelike finished look. This is close to being completed in his face. You can see all the warmths that permeate on his chin, just slightly on his chin, really, his cheeks, his nose, above his eyes, and of course the cools of his beard. I strive to set a certain tone or mood, really, with all of my work, not only really with the subject matter, but with the actual application of color and how it's applied and how it reads. You can see here all these little individual cues that, when you see from a distance, read as quite natural, but up close are very textural. And really the whole thing adds a certain depth and prevents the skin from looking too uniform, really. Here I'm zooming in on his neck and adding some of the light tones to the bottom of the neck. But you can also see a lot of the expressive marks in his clothing, and in the background there you can see his hair. They were mostly just flat color. There were some tonal changes in his hair for the final work. The clothing, however, I wasn't sure what to do with. Initially I'd hoped that a lot of the yellow underpainting would show through it, but as we'll see in a moment, I kept adding to it and getting it more to a quote-unquote finished stage, which really I was okay with. When you paint intuitively, which is really the focus of my channel for all of my videos, really, the ones I've put out and the ones I will put out, you know certain things when you start with the painting process. You know the design, you obviously know the subject, where you're going to place him, and then it comes down to the drawing, which is very important. Mark making, edges, we covered that last week with a video. But the end result as to where you're going to stop a painting is always a big question mark. As you can see here, I'm sort of working his shirt in, not knowing how much of that yellow I want to have sort of show through in the final painting stage. Now, watching this, interestingly enough, I wished I'd probably put in the background at this stage and not wait. But I guess that's just the joys of painting and the mystery it adds, and it makes you grow, really. Over time you'll find that you make the right choices as you make your mistakes. And now I am painting that background with that cool blue, as you saw in that final image of the piece. My intention here is highly intuitive. I'm putting down these marks. I've mixed mostly titanium white with a bit of yellow ochre, some ultramarine blue, and permanent green, but it's very light. I don't know what I'm putting down or where I'm going to stop. I'm putting down these marks with intentions of covering the background as much as possible. And really, depending on the substrate that you use, you can always wipe away paint. This particular painting was painted on a gator board, that was primed with acrylic gesso, so you can wipe away paint not as well as you could if it was an oil-based ground. But as you'll see in a moment, I do put all this down in most places, and then I do wipe away some of it. The reality is this end stage of painting sometimes takes as long as painting the subject himself. I've heard someone say, it may have been Richard Schmidt, in a quote, something to the effect of, every painting reaches a stage where you start reducing things, you start getting rid of things to make it stronger. And this particular piece was no different. I obviously didn't record any of that stage, but I got rid of a lot of the, if you want to call it, visual noise or excess brush marks in his hair, really. And as I said earlier, as you can see there, completed more of his shirt. Here I'm finishing off the piece with a brayer, a tool that I use a lot as well. It is unpredictable, however, especially during the stage. It basically lays down color in a certain way, and then if you like it, great. If not, I guess you have to remove it. As I zoom in here with my camera to show you all the little small hues of color that we've applied, I wanted you to focus on all the places where yellow underpainting shows, permeates through in his clothing, the background, his neck. You can see obviously creates a silhouette around his body, and also where I've chosen to sort of have these drip marks to create sort of visual interest on his clothing. This painting was a whole lot of fun to paint, really. If I can give, in closing, any tips, one would be try not to use blacks or browns straight, always mix them, as otherwise you create flat painting. And for the highlights, always mix a yellow ochre or Naples yellow for the nose, the brows, and so on. This particular video was mostly concerned about complementary color foundation and, of course, painting darker skin tones. But the mark making and laying colors down, which I'm known for, and definitely is used a lot with this particular portrait, can be viewed much more so in my previous videos. I will link one of those videos down below, which goes into depth again with how I layer colors and, very importantly, how I arrange my palette. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next week with part 2 of this underpainting series, where we lay down a lot more of a curious underpainting, multi-layered approach. So do subscribe to not miss that. I will see you next week.